domande e risposte. Già ti dico, Donato, che c'è un amico, Friedrich, che ci chiede di switchare all'inglese, quindi io da adesso parlerò in inglese. Ok, thanks Friedrich. We switch to the English. Donato, as you prefer. If you want to split your presentation in 3 parts, we can do that. Otherwise, we follow the standard rule and we collect all Q&As at the end.
You know, there is a trade-off, because I have more than 40 slides. So on one side, it could be better to do all the sequences of the 3 pictures.
Okay.
Because the 3 pictures are this, so
okay.
I can speculate on these 3 pictures.
Okay.
At the end of the day, perhaps it's better the usual procedure, because otherwise my fear that it could be a crowding out in the last part. So
okay.
So
in this case, I ask you to spend no more than 15 minutes for each part.
Okay. So I will check the time in some way. Sorry, I try to understand how to put. 1 second, please.
No, if you want, I keep you posted with the time, of course.
Okay, I am okay. Okay, or I will try. But
okay. Anyway,
so if you
we can. Shall we start? We are very happy to have Donato Masciandaro for the 4th virtual seminar of the Italian Economic Association. Donato, he doesn't need any presentation. He's one of the most important monetary economists in our country. His speech today is on ECB helicopter money, economic and political economy arithmetic. So, Donato, the rule, as we said before, you split your presentation in 3 parts. 15 minutes each. Then we have 5 minutes, more or less, for Q&As on that part. Please, for the audience, please use the Q&As option and not the chat option, and that's it. The floor, so the video is yours.
Thank you to Alberto. Thank you to invite me. Thank you to Marco for the organization. There is a lot of reason to explain why I'm so glad to be here this morning, for the people that invite me, for my, I would say, legacy with the Società Italiana degli Economisti. But let me stop here because there are really too much reason. So, which is the motivation? We spend a series of weeks in this month during the quarantine to thinking about how our topics and issues. And so in the previous month, there was this sort, in my mind, this sort of helicopter money puzzle, because, you know, helicopter money is a sort of economic taboo that sometime emerges, and then the helicopter never flies. So the answer is the question is why? Because I do, you know, I enjoy to do an analysis on the economic literatures, and you can see that there are a sort of cycles. The more is emerging a crisis, the more is likely that you have debates on the helicopter money. But still, helicopter money remains a taboo. In a nutshell, my exploration is a sort of the political economy of this economic taboo. In other way, a lot of discussion, cyclical discussion, but helicopter money never flow. And why? Basically, which is the explanation? In the literature, there is an explanation, as the explanation supplied by Gali. it's an economics explanation, basically, which is the idea. The idea is that usually helicopter money is analyzed in a classic economy, i.e. with fully flexible prices and wages. And so the more you trust in this classical economy, the more helicopter money risks to be just an inflation device. Here, I'm trying to offer you another explanation, not an alternative one, a political economy perspective, which is basically based on three general pillars. The three pillars are that each monetary policy can produce redistributive effects. The second pillar is that the more such as effects are politically relevant, the more the monetary policy will be disputable. In other way, economics usually found out one equilibrium. If you apply a political economy approach in such a topic, is more likely that you have a multiple equilibrium situation. And given these three pillars, helicopter money is just a special case of this general change. And in the paper, there is a theoretical model, and also intertwined, there is an application of the ACB, just, to have a concrete simulation of which could be the chain of this political economy of an helicopter money action. So this is the setup of my presentation, motivation done. Then there will be three parts, three steps, three pictures. First, and in a sense, are the three contributes that I will try to offer. First, the first difficulty that I had to address and fix it was, but what is an helicopter money? So how to pick up a common definition. Secondly, there is the economics of the story, and then there is the political economy. In a sense, we will see in a moment a really simple model. This is the reason of the words arithmetics. A really simple model, which is a sort of a coin with two faces. There is the usual story, the economics of helicopter money, and then there is the political economy. And then there will be, if there will be time for the conclusion, for the further possible steps of the research, and which are the background papers. There is a short article already published on COVID economics 1 month ago, and I'm still working on this, and there is another working paper that is forthcoming on social science research network. So first step, the state of the heart, which was basically my problem. My problem is try to understand which is the differences, if any, between an helicopter money and what we call usually conventional and unconventional monetary policy. And at the end of the day, the bottom line of this part is that we can define, we can have, in my view, an helicopter money when essentially we have a goal, increase the aggregate demands, and in order to reach this goal, there should be a one-shot creation of irredeemable fiat money, i.e., an irredeemable assets in the hands of the citizens that produce some consequences in the central bank balance sheets, in the sense that you will see we can have two different kinds of helicopter money. Net worth helicopter money, where given a monetary policy expansion, there is a losses in terms of sedionage. And on top, or you can have an helicopter money when given still an expansionary monetary policy, we have a permanent monetary base change. If you apply this definition, you can distinguish an helicopter money from conventional and unconventional monetary policy, which is the starting point, which is the ingredients of this story. And I will try to summarize the review of the literature. In general, in this paper, you have two policies. You have on one side a fiscal policy, on the other side you have monetary policy with a common aim, which is to increase the demand for goods and services. So basically you have usually a recession, so there is a need for a fiscal backstop, and then you wonder how to finance this fiscal backstop, and one possibility is to have a one-shot direct monetization. In which occasion the literature talk and discuss about true or false, I would say, helicopter money. In the paper there are more details, but here just picking up some episodes. One episode is not so recent, in the sense that usually we speak about the truly unconventional monetary policy, truly unconventional exceptional monetary policy. But for example, I'm quoting Ugolini. There was an example during a bubonic epidemic in which the Republic of Venice paid necessary goods for the population in money issued by the Banco del Giro. Then in 2009, the Australian government sent central bank check to taxpayers. And then we have three recent episodes during the coronavirus pandemic. We have in February two governments, the government of Hong Kong and the government of Singapore, that transfer money to the citizen. That in March there was the US CARES Act, the direct cash payment to households. And finally, there is in April the announcement by the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe he promised to give a one-off sum equivalent to $90-30 to every citizen of Japan. But the fact that you have a fiscal transfer doesn't mean that you have an helicopter money. On the other side, the fact that you have a direct central bank money transfer is neither a necessary nor a sufficient condition for an helicopter money, in the sense that you can have a situation, as in the case of the Bundesbank, in which the central bank is just a public debit manager, and in this case there is not an helicopter money. And the same is true when the central bank just provides short-term loans that the government can use an overdraft facilities, as in the case of the Bank of England. So at the end of the story, how to pick up the extraordinary nature of helicopter money? My answer is that you have to pick up some extraordinary consequences on the central bank balance sheets. And so if you apply this definition, given an expansionary monetary policy, you can have two different kinds of helicopter money. I call the first case the network helicopter money, in the sense that there is an expansionary monetary policy and the consequences are intended losses in the central bank balance sheets in terms of negative value of the present value of future flow of saving rates. And you can have another kind of helicopter money in which you have, given the expansionary monetary policy, you have a permanent increase in central bank liability. In a nutshell, how to distinguish between these two different kinds of helicopter money the more easy way is to use the concept of seigniorage. In one case, you have a seigniorage loss. In another case, you have seigniorage gains. And so, just to have a taxonomy, you can have monetary-based helicopter money, network helicopter money, and you have also cases, let me joke on this, of fake helicopter money. In the sense you can find out paper that speak about normal central bank action in the financial markets that lack of the two features of this definition of helicopter money, which are these two key features: a permanent money basic growth or central bank balance sheet losses. If you have neither one nor the other, in my view, we cannot speak about an helicopter money option. Which are the consequences of an helicopter money? Here we can split two different positions, in the sense that, you know, the analysis, there are pros and cons, but in some papers, the pros are greater than the cons, and the opposite is true in other papers. But again, it's not the final outcome which matter, but are the consequences. In other way, it is possible to summarize all the macroeconomic results in terms of how to put helicopter money in a framework. I try to do this summary. At the end of the day, helicopter money economics, we can simulate an helicopter money economics having a standard macroeconomic model with nominal rigidity, and given this economy, what is a helicopter money is a one-shot monetization that trigger an increase in demands, i.e. an increase in the nominal GDP, without any consequences in terms of debts and or in terms of taxes. And these positives consequences, if your goal is an increase in the nominal GDP, is more likely to occur if there are three conditions that you satisfy. Players are rational, the policies is credible, and the central bank is an independent central bank that decide to implement such as operation. Just to mention that also I tried to translate this modern meaning of helicopter money in the original Friedman parables. And when he wrote everyone is combines, in my modern translation means that the agents are rational and they internalize the intertemporal budget constraints. And if everyone is combined, then helicopter money is a unique event which will never be repeated. This is the definition. In this modern translation is a one-shot creation exactly of irredeemable fiat money that is credible, being implemented. Is credible, this is a unique event. And so, if everyone is combined, it is a unique event, then there will be macroeconomic consequences. Which macroeconomic consequences? In the Friedman conclusion was just inflation. In general, we can say that we will have both real and nominal effects depending on how you are define your economic system. Bottom line, the helicopter money economics seems to be well-founded. There are very nice formal analyses, Buiter, Gali, and the more recent, really elegant paper made by Benigno and Nistikov. So technically seems to be feasible. But why this is and concretely seems to be unfeasible. Galli offered this explanation that I mentioned before. Basically, the more you have an economy without friction and legs, the less useful will be an helicopter money. It will be just a trigger of inflation. It can be an explanation. And in fact, we can mimic an helicopter money economics with an economy with the feature that I already described. Here in this paper, we had one more perspective, which is the idea. The idea is true. You can have an economy in which we have rational households and firms, an independent central bank can design and implement an optimal helicopter money in terms of social welfare. But notwithstanding so, this result holds if players are completely homogeneous. If the players are heterogeneous, it's just one feature of the player is heterogeneous, you can have different equilibria, and the optimal helicopter money is less likely to occur. Then, first part done. Second part, economics of optimal helicopter money. A really simple framework in which we have essentially three players: a citizen, a government, and a central bank. You will see really standard assumption, all but one. The citizens are risk neutral and they draw utility for consumption and utility for labor. And as usual, they use their net labor income, standard, and their asset, this is not standard, to buy consumption good. In a way, in this paper, I'm using a general economic setting, an application of this general economic setting in which we have citizens that have homogeneous income in terms of labor, but they have heterogeneity in terms of financial assets. Why these differences? In this manner, we can zoom on the key differences. The key differences is that are the effect of extraordinary monetary policy when there are financial redistributive effects that are at the same time politically relevant. Needless to say, if you had also heterogeneity in labor income, the results are likely to be even more strengthened. Let me start from normal time. We are standard citizen that work, and they care about the net labor income, taking into account on the taxation. And as usual, there is an inverse correlation between labor supply and tax rates. Again, and in normal time, there is the usual correlation between output growth and optimal labor supply. On top, the citizens have an initial wealth, and then they have assets with a market value. Why these assets can be related to the consumption? Because the citizen can use this asset as collateral in building up loans in competitive financial market. In this setting, we need the market to make loans and to have free risk rates for the interest structures. So we have assets, and then this asset can be used as collateral, and so we can have also financial liability, and so we can have a ratio between liabilities and assets that use as a metric to parameterize the citizen leverage. In a way, this is a proxy for the citizens' creditworthiness, which influence their welfare. Why? Because there is a correlation between citizen consumption, labors, and financial assets. That's normal time, normal citizen. But then, suddenly a pandemic occurs. When there is a pandemic, which is the reaction of the government, there is a double reaction. On one side, the government have to react because have to take care about one important public goals, public health. But on the other side, we need sorry, oh, okay. Sorry, there are unexpected shocks in my room because it's the cleaning moment in Bocconi University. This is a proof that this is on live, so but I can go ahead. And so what I'm saying, thanks, lady. What I'm saying that given a pandemic, the government have to react and have to address and fix a really unpleasant dilemma between two public goals. On one side, public health, and on our side, we have economic cost, because in order to address the pandemic shocks, you need to implement a lockdown. But the more you implement a harsh lockdown, you have an economic cost. And so the government have to implement on one side a containment policy and on the other side a fiscal backstop. And it could be a monetary financing of such as fiscal backstop. Then, at the end, this economic policy mix can affect the overall macroeconomic outcome. And so the sequence of events is described in the slides. I think that I can skip the description on why the cities, why the governments have to face this unpleasant dilemma, because unfortunately, I imagine that we know that any containment policy affects the economy at least through two different pillars: the shocks on aggregate supply, shocks on aggregate demands, and the consequences of these two intertwined shocks are economics and financial losses that dampen the balance sheets of the citizens. And so this is the key part of the story. All the shocks of the pandemics harms the balance sheets of the citizens. And so the probability that they remain safe and sound borrowers are lower. On top, in order to be complete in terms of description during what is going on a pandemic, I also had the so-called second round effect of the banking and financial sector. The more there are no fiscal backstop, the more likely are second round effects also on the safeness and soundness of the banking and financial system as a whole. In other way, the government have to avoid to have a double dip recession. First, due to a pandemic, and secondly, due to a balance sheet recession. And so, what the government can do to minimize the economic cost? The government can implement a fiscal backstop, or you can call this a financial hibernation. What you can do, you can use cash transfer in favor of household and firms in order to avoid liquidity running, avoiding pro-cyclicality and the likes. And in order to do this cash transfer, you need a huge effort in terms of public finance. In other way, you can use fiscal backstop or financial hibernation in order to capture the aim of the government to preserve the vital relationship between firms, worker supply, and customers. Concretely, in our simple model, which is the idea that the government can do some things in terms of fiscal backstop. Which are the possible outcomes? There are a lot of possible outcomes before two opposite scenarios. On one extreme, no backstop. In this case, the citizen completely lose their assets and their creditworthiness. On the other claim, the fiscal backstop is complete, and so there is a complete bailout in favor of both citizens and firms. And so we can capture the degree of the backstop using beta. How to finance this backstop? You can have, we are in a system in which we are an independent central bank, we will see in a moment. So we are in a monetary dominant system. So given the central bank decision in terms of monetization, the government can raise taxes or can issue debts. When there is debt issuance, there are two possible players involved. There could be citizen or central banks. Here the central banks is involved, we have a monetization, and which are the cost of bond issuance is an interest rates that we can normalize, and we can assume that is we have a no arbitrary condition respect to the risk-free interest rate, which is as usual normalized to 0. If there is a backstop, which are the consequences on the citizen? Here you have two possible channels in action, in the sense that on one side you have the value of the fiscal backstop for the citizen. And this is the direct value of the monetary cash transfers. But on top, there is another channel. There is a higher effect due to the interest payment of the public bond, which are issued in the market and which are sold to the citizen. For the sake of completeness, this is a one-shot analysis, but we have also to internalize the future negative spillover of the overall policy mix. And which are these future negative spillover? The first are the possible consequences of the helicopter money. In other way, we know perfectly that helicopter money today is not a free lunch. In other way, there is a risk in terms of monetary externality. We can call this risk in a more general terms, we have monetary stability risks. There are different channels. The traditional one is inflation, more recent one are the bubble risk and the likes. In other way, in this manner, and to be concrete, we assume that the more there are fiscal monetization, the more there are risks that there are tweak to the monetary stability goal when the pandemic will end. And so we correlated this kind of monetary externality risks with the dimension of the fiscal monetization, if you like, with the dimension of helicopter money sides. Just for the sake of completeness, I try to have in these pictures also the negative second round financial effects that I mentioned a few slides ago, in the sense we can say that if there is no fiscal backup, there could be some fragmentation effect, some financial hysteresis, if you wish, or when the pandemic ends. Let me say that these financial externalities are not essential in the story, but again, for the sake of completeness, given that in the description there is this second round effect, I like to insert also this financial externality. But you will see in a moment they are not essential if we zoom on the optimal monetary policy. Alberto?
Donato, you have more or less 13 minutes.
13 minutes.
14 minutes.
Okay. Last player, the central bank. The central bank, we are in a monetary dominance regime. The central bank is an independent central bank. I assume that you know the reasons. And I imagine some friend of mine, as Alberto, know that I completely dislike the central bank independent issues. So let me skip out this motivation. Let me assume that you know the motivation. So the central bank is independent. The central bank have no electoral appointment. The central bank can be assumed as a long side player. And so it maximizes the overall citizen welfare function, taking into account all the possible consequences in terms of debt, tax distortions, and risk of monetization. On the end of the day, we have the optimal level of helicopter money drops, which depends on three drivers: the tax distortionary effect, the cost of debts, and the risk of monetary instability. In other way, what we did, this is the end of the second step, we mimic the helicopter money economics. In fact, we have an economy with frictions. We have an independent central bank that design a one-shot monetization that produce macroeconomic stabilization, taking into account debts and tax consequences as well. Citizens are rational, there is perfect information, and they trust the central banks, because the central banks, here there are no information asymmetries, neither information asymmetries nor uncertainty. At the end of the story, what we have a final consumption which internalizes the fiscal backup effect, including the helicopter money consequences. And how big is helicopter money? It depends on how the economic system works. In other way, we are mimic the example that Gali did in his paper. If you think that we are in a classic economy, helicopter money means just inflation. Can we distinguish between network helicopter money and monetary-based helicopter money? We can distinguish, just assuming that given that it is central banks that evaluates the consequences, the central bank can evaluate the consequences of two different helicopter money options depending on which is the concrete technique that the central bank would like to use. The network helicopter money option or the monetary-based helicopter money option. Here there is the application to the ECB. Sorry, I would like to skip, and then perhaps in the Q&A we can come back to this idea. Basically, I wonder if it's possible to have this hypothesis in a situation in which there are perpetuals that are issues, and so the central bank can become the buyer. And technically, it's possible if the central bank decides that there are no risks in terms of monetary stability, and it is an optimal monetary policy. But is this politically feasible, such as assumption? It depends on the cost-benefit analysis of national citizens and their national government. And so, let me introduce the political economy approach. Here, the problem, how to design the policymaker. You can have three possibilities. First, the government is a standard benevolent policymaker. In this case, you obtain an optimal coordinated fiscal and monetary policy. In other words, both the government and the central bank mimic the social player. Full stop. Secondly, you can have politician in charge, not benevolent policymaker, but the citizens are completely homogeneous. And so if there is a voting procedure with a median voter, you mimic the previous results. The more interesting case is if we have at some time politician in charge and heterogeneous citizens in terms of financial assets. In this case, you have a redistributive effect. In this case, you have winners and losers. And if the winners and losers, the preferences of winners and losers are consistent with their political preferences, can be some political consequences of an helicopter money drops. In other way, here I'm just applying the well-known results that the more is true that if we have distributional effect in a political tax, the politician would like to influence this policy. And let me just quote a masterpiece in this literature made by Alberto Alesina and Guido Tabellini in 2007. And let me just recall in a second that Alberto Alesina prematurely passed away some day ago. Just to remember him and all the people that had the likeness to meet him and know perfectly how big will be the hole in our profession. So, distributional effects, this is the general intuition. The general intuition is that we can have distributional effects in monetary policy, and there is the so-called 3D story of Goddard and Lastra, distributional effect per se, directional effect, and duration effects, and which is the spatialness of helicopter money, that we have these three kinds of potential effect in action. In other way, which is the basic intuition. The more you have redistributional effect in a monetary policy action, the more can be political consequences. In a sense, in my story, you can have conventional monetary policy, unconventional monetary policy, and truly exceptional monetary policy. In all this policy, you can have the redistributive effect. The more you have the distributive effect, the more can you have political consequences. If there is a channel between redistribution and voting, here you have two redistributive channels. In the fiscal bad curve, there are winners and losers, in the sense that you have subsidized citizen and not subsidized citizen, depending on the leverage. At the same time, and in parallel, also, given the helicopter money, you have losers and winners, because you have wealthy citizens and they have assets in their portfolio, they have bonds, so they become more richer if there are higher interest rates. The opposite is true if you have monetization. In other way, there are people that like monetization because they dislike high interest rate, and people that dislike monetization because they like a positive and possibly higher interest rates. The more these people vote, the more depending of the distributions of winners and losers in terms of fiscal backdrop consequences and helicopter money effects, you can have optimal helicopter money, which is different from the optimal helicopter money set by the central bank. In other way, we have a matrix. We have a political distortion. Concretely, given the fiscal backstop, the number of citizens against the helicopter money will be higher. The higher the majority of voters are wealthy, the higher is the interest rates, and the higher the risk in terms of monetary stability. And the more there is a perception of unfair monetary policy, the more you can have hostility and resentment against the central bank. Alberto, how many minutes I have? 0? Sorry, Alberto. Alberto, unmute.
You have no more than 3 minutes.
No more than 3 minutes. So, hostility against the central banks, we can have a lot of anecdotal on this, and so let me skip. Let me go to the conclusion. This is a very simple framework, and there are a lot of simple assumptions. Let me recall. First, monetary stability risk and citizen homogeneity in this respect. In my story, externality in terms of monetary stability risk are homogeneous. It's simple. The more you include citizen heterogeneity, the more you can have even more multiple equilibria situation. Then there is the possibility of have income heterogeneity, and also in this case, my feeling is that we have even more robust results. What about the assumption that we have an exogenous interest rates? We can have an endogenous interest rates, but my feeling is that the more you have an endogenous interest rates which is correlated with the stock of debt, the more you can have redistributive consequences. Central bank, is it true that the central bank is always a social planner? No. So we can change this assumption. We can assume that there is a committee. And in this case, we know that the outcome of the monetary policy cannot be automatically consistent with the social planner choices. On the other hand, you can have assumption of political captures. But the more is true, this assumption, the more the political driver became even more important. Final, what about redistributive monetary policy and political effects? Helicopter money simulation is just an exceptional case. It's a special case of a general tale. Redistribution matter. Let me give the more recent example. The ruling of the German court against the ECB QE, which is based on a legal principle, proportionality. Now, if you read the ruling, and you try to read the ruling in terms of economics, proportionality means redistribution. And so, one more proof that redistribution is important. Okay, here I elaborate on these reasons, but we have no time. Thank you, and sorry for my crowding out.
Thank you very much, Donato. Now we can open the Q&A session. So please, if you have any question, you can write in the Q&A option in Zoom. I have, as probably you see, two questions from Chiara Punzo. She asked, first, a clarification if monetary and fiscal intervention are independent in your framework.
Sorry, Alberto, sorry, one moment. I have some problem to, oh my God, to come back to the big screen.
Probably there is a red button near share screen. When you look, you have a red button with the share screen, and then stop share.
Here I have this once, no stop video.
No, above, near share screen.
The problem is
that, no, on top.
On top.
You should see a red button.
Not quit Zoom, not start Zoom, not close the door. Oh, okay.
Okay, great.
So, sorry, apologize. This web seminar are nice.
Okay, doesn't matter. Anyway, we have two, for now, we have two questions from Chiara Punzo. The first one is a clarification question. If in your framework, monetary and fiscal policy interventions are independent or not.
Okay.
And second, if you could say something more about the redistribution channel, how this channel affect your conclusion. And in a way, I add to this question raised by Chiara, because I would like to know, to better understand how the redistribution channel of helicopter money, in what sense this is different from redistributional effect of monetary policy in general, I have to say, of redistributional effect of inflation or all the other monetary policy interventions.
Yeah, two nice points. First, thanks to Chiara. First question, in the setting, the two policy are independent. The answer is yes, in the sense that, as I said, we are in a monetary dominance regime, in the sense the central bank decides the degree of fiscal monetization, and given the central bank decision, the government decide the overall fiscal backstop. What I did, why I used this framework, just to mimic the traditional story of the economics of helicopter money. And in fact, when you have that both players are benevolent player, the results is, I would say, a normal coordination between two benevolent player, an optimal fiscal policy and an optimal monetary policy. This is a normal situation. And you can have this normal situation if all the citizens are homogeneous. And then let me go to the second question, putting together the Chiara question and Alberto question. You say, Donato, is in any monetary policy, we can have redistributive effects. Also in the more conventional one, just moving the interest rates. True. We can have winners and losers, which are respectively borrowers and lenders, but usually the perception of this channel are really hidden. You know better than me that the issue of redistributive effect on monetary policy is relatively recent, while the story of nominal interest rate change is more older. And why? Because the redistributive effects are lower and or hidden. Then, the more you have redistributive effect, the more you can have political consequences, i.e. equilibria, which are different from the standard one. Why helicopter money is different is this is the first part of my story, and there is nothing original in this. What I just try to answer, how to distinguish an helicopter money from another unconventional monetary policy. And my answer is that it could be some extraordinary consequences in the central bank balance sheets. One possibility is that given an expansionary monetary policy, you have intended losses in the central bank capital. The other possibility, and for example, you found out this channel in the Gali model, the more recent one. More common is, I would say, the second kind of helicopter money, what I called the monetary base helicopter money, in which, given the expansion, you have a permanent increase in the monetary base. The difference is, I would say, is in terms of segeners, spillover. In one case, other things being equal, you have a negative segeners. In the second case, you have a positive segeners. So, in other way, it's true. There is always a relationship between monetary policy and redistributive effects, but you can have different size and channel depending on the kind of policies that you are using. In fact, the German court disputes the proportionality effects, which imply spillover on monetary policies in other economic policies. And if you read the ruling, which are these spillover effects? Savings, zombie firms, banks, these are redistributive effects. The more you dispute redistributive effects, the more you can have political consequences if redistribution is relevant.
Okay, there is another question by Massimo Amato. He wondered if it's possible to imagine a targeted helicopter money policy, since you introduced the heterogeneity in your model, if also the, how to say, the response of monetary authority can be heterogeneous.
Thank you, Massimo, for your question. Yes, it is possible, and the target is in the fiscal part of the story, in the sense that, if you recall, the story is a policy mix between a fiscal action as a monetary action. The more there are targets in the fiscal backdrop, the more you can have in a population winners and losers. So there will be people that will like the cash transfer and people that dislike, depending on the consequences or on their financial and or banking portfolio. The answer is yes, we can introduce But the more we introduce target, goals, heterogeneity, the more there will be true that we will enter in a multiple equilibria setting, and politics will be more and more important.
Okay. I have an additional question. Typically, for what I understand, typically the supporter of helicopter money, one of the argument is that citizens obtain directly cash in their portfolio, and so the effect on aggregate demand is much more is stronger, and I would like to understand how this type of argument is in your story, or is
Alberto, it's not the usual way of reacting. It's a good question in the sense that there is one more possible dimension. We never saw an helicopter money because we have technical problem to implement it, right? But we had this problem some years ago, in the sense that today, for example, if you have digital cash, you can have helicopter money. So in terms of distribution, it not seems to me that the key argument to explain why helicopter money is a taboo is a technical reasons. Imagine that you have a digital cash with an expiring periods. In this manner, you force the people to spend. So imagine that you have an ECB digital cash with an expiring dates. That's helicopter money. So my feeling is that it could be technically possible, and also the economics make sense, but why still is it is it a taboo? My answer is that the more there is redistribution, the more there will be winners and losers, the more is unlikely to occur. If there are heterogeneous people, assume that in the European Union there are heterogeneous people. No?
Okay, any other question? Okay, thanks so much, Donato. We are 10 minutes over, so even if we started with, I would say, 10 minutes later, so perfectly on time. Thank you very much. And Marco, if you want to say something about the next, please, Donato.
Alberto, I just would like to thanks for attention and passion all the friends and colleagues. Apologize for my crowding out. This was the first presentation on this paper, so I have a lot of food for thoughts, and for any colleagues that we will follow to talk about this, welcome content and public, new other webinar. Welcome. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. Your presentation was wonderful. Marco, can you conclude?
Alberto, giusto,
yes.
io ritorno in italiano giusto per chiudere, ma poi chiudi te. L'informazione è 4 giugno ore 17, quindi stesso giorno della settimana, ore 17, Massimo Florio, seminario di Massimo Florio.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody.
Il titolo del seminario.
The title of the speech.
Just 1 minute. I don't remember by heart.
Yes, it's something on health system, something on that.
Okay, this is a marketing device, Alberto. The curiosity of the people.
Okay.
Grazie.
Thanks so much. Thank you to everybody. See you next Thursday. Bye bye.
Thank you, grazie.
Bye. Ciao, ciao Donato, è stato un piacere. Ciao.